Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really important theological idea, one that shapes how millions of people think about gender, family, and even society. And it all boils down to this simple but powerful phrase: equal but different.
So, equal but different. What does that actually mean? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. We're going to unpack where the idea comes from, see how it plays out in the real world, and then look at a major modern debate that puts the whole concept to the test.
To really get our heads around the different part of that phrase, we have to start at the very beginning, with the theological foundation. And that's all about the purpose of human sexuality in traditional Catholic and Christian thinking.
Okay, so this all starts with a concept from the Catholic Catechism called natural law. Now, think of it like this. It's the belief that moral rules aren't just made up. They're actually woven right into the fabric of creation, kind of like a built-in instruction manual for humanity that we can figure out just by using our reason.
So, following that idea of natural law, the Church teaches that sexuality in a marriage has two core purposes that you just can't pull apart. First, there's the unitive purpose, bringing a husband and wife into this incredibly deep personal unity. And second, there's the procreative one, being open to creating new life. In this view, those two things are a package.
Right, so you might be wondering, how does this core belief about sexuality in marriage lead to specific roles for men and women? Well, that brings us to the main event, the central framework for this whole explainer.
And that framework has a name: complementarianism. Now, the ideas themselves are ancient, but the word itself is pretty modern. It was first used back in 1988. The core belief is that men and women are created absolutely equal in dignity and value, but they're designed with different and complementary functions.
And this is the phrase you'll hear over and over from people who hold this view: ontologically equal, functionally different. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. It just means equal in your very being, your value as a person, but different in your role or your function. And let me tell you, that distinction is absolutely central to this entire idea.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what do these functionally different roles actually look like in day-to-day life? Let's check out how this idea gets applied in two really important places: the home and the church.
All right, so here's how it breaks down in marriage, according to groups like the Southern Baptist Convention. The husband's role is seen as one of servant leadership. It's called to provide, protect, and lead his family. And the wife's role? It's to graciously submit to that leadership and to serve as his partner or helper.
And this idea of different roles doesn't just stay in the home. It extends to church life too. So within this complementarian framework, proponents believe that certain leadership positions, ones that hold spiritual authority over men, like being a pastor, are biblically set aside just for men.
Now, this theological framework has been a bedrock of tradition for centuries. But in the modern world, it's facing a huge challenge. And interestingly, that challenge isn't coming from another theology, but from a totally different field: social science.
And the challenge really boils down to this one big question. Is that traditional family structure, which, is a key outcome of complementarian logic, is it really essential for kids to thrive? What does the actual data have to say?
And here's where the debate really heats up. You've got numerous studies, often cited by major organizations like the American Psychological Association, that have come to a striking conclusion. There's basically no discernible difference in how kids turn out, whether they're raised by same-sex parents or heterosexual parents. Now, you can see how that finding would directly challenge a major pillar of the complementarian argument.
But wait, the story's not over. Because critics of these no-different studies have a response. And their argument isn't really a theological one, it's a scientific one, aimed directly at the research methods themselves.
The very first critique, and it's a big one, is brought up by scholars like Ryan T. Anderson, and it's all about something called selection bias.
So what on earth is that? Well, the argument goes like this. The two groups being compared in these studies might not be an apples-to-apples comparison. Think about it. Same-sex couples often have to go through really difficult, really expensive processes to have kids. This tends to mean the couples who succeed are often older, wealthier, more educated, and super motivated. So critics ask, is it really fair to compare that very specific group to the entire, much broader population of heterosexual parents, which includes everybody from all walks of life?
All right, that's criticism number one. The second major issue critics bring up, something highlighted by Professor Walter Shum, zeroes in on a completely different factor that's super important for kids: how stable is the parents' relationship.
To make this point, they'll show you data from studies like this one from 2012. Now, it tracked families from the time their child was in kindergarten all the way to 8th grade, and it found that the breakup rate for married heterosexual parents was about 4.4%,
But, as you can see, the rates it found for same-sex parents in this particular study were a lot higher. So the argument from critics is that relationship instability is a massive factor in a child's well-being, and it has to be part of the equation.
So when you put it all together, critics like Dr. Shum are basically saying, whoa, not so fast. Because of these issues, like selection bias and questions about relationship stability, they argue that the scientific consensus some people claim, well, it isn't nearly as settled as it might look. They believe that concluding there are no differences is jumping the gun.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, you can see just how layered this whole debate is. It kicks off with the theological framework built on natural law. Then, that framework gets a major challenge from modern social science. And then, that social science gets critiqued on its own scientific terms. It leaves us with a really complex and, honestly, a lingering question. When deeply held beliefs crash into social data, who really gets to write the final conclusion?